I'm going to show you how to make late 90s style tech house chord stabs like you'd hear on a Terry Lee Brown Jr. song from 1997. Late 90s tech house was very different from the tech house we hear today. A true combination of techno and deep house. Labels like Plastic City released complete bangers from producers like The Time Writer, G-Pal, Terry Lee Brown Jr., and many more. Now, tech house varied a lot in the style. Some leaned a little more towards deep house, some a little more towards techno, dub, minimal, but a staple of tech house from this period were those deep techno stabs. It often involved some type of filtered, plucky sound going into a massive ping-pong delay and reverb. With the advent of the Rompler and sampler, it was possible to create some really cool sounds by combining analog waveforms with Rompler sound. The possibilities are endless, and I'm going to show you some of the techniques you can use to create stabs from this genre. I want to start with a very basic dub techno stab formula here. And so if we look at something like dub techno, a lot of these stabs are going to be based on analog waveforms or analog synths. Very simply, things like a sawtooth, a triangle, or any classic waveforms going into a filter and big delay. So once you learn this basic formula, you can create a stab with really any sound. So let's start with just a simple analog synth, and we're going to use the Polymax here. Again, any analog synth is going to work. And for a waveform, we're just going to use a sawtooth waveform here in just one oscillator. Now, on the filter, we're going to keep the filter wide open here. I'm going to turn off all my processing and my chords. And if we just play a single note, the big thing to get right here is the amp envelope. So if I come into my amp envelope, I basically want an instant attack. So as soon as I press a key on my MIDI keyboard, the sound starts. I want no sustain, no release, and then a little bit of decay. And this is what gives you that plucky envelope sound. So if we solo with the pattern, now, where this comes alive is when we turn this into a chord. So if I flip on my chord device here, and then I can send that into a big delay. Now, for a delay, a ping pong delay is typically best for this. Any BST delay is going to be great. A classic delay to use is this delay tape here from Arturia. And so that is in essence the framework for a dub techno stab. Some type of sound with a very plucky envelope into a ping pong delay, and then we could even send that into a reverb. Now, where things get interesting is when you begin to play with the filter. So for example, the sawtooth, there's a lot of bite in the higher frequencies. And so if we just take a low pass filter here and drop the cutoff, it's going to take out a lot of those higher frequency bitiness in the sound. And then where you can begin to really shape the sound is by just changing the filter types or even modulating the filter cutoff. So if I just do it manually, right? So that's where, again, a lot of the additional sound comes from. So I'm going to open the filter back up and actually use the filter in Bitwig. And what we were playing with in the Polymax was a low pass filter. But if I come in and actually use a high pass filter and bump up the resonance, you're going to get a much lighter stab sound like this. And it really is a process of finding the sweet spot with the resonance. So if I kind of move this filter around, and then I can try different filter types there. So a band pass can be a really nice sound. And that is, again, in essence, how we build a dub techno stab. From here, we can start to get very creative. In the 90s, Romplers began to get super popular, so things like the Chord Triton, for example, where it had sample-based sounds in it. And so it had traditional sounds, like sounds from analog synths, sawtooth waves, square waves, etc., but it also had samples of things like electric pianos, organs, so on and so forth. So I could go into a synth like the Chord Triton, and I can easily recreate those analog type sounds. So in this one, we're just using a sawtooth wave with a very plucky envelope, right? And then down bitwig or filter with a high pass into a ping pong delay, right? So I've recreated that same sound I would create with an analog synth in a Rompler, just by using analog waveforms. Here's another example in the Chord Triton where I'm using a detuned pulse width modulation sample, right? And again, if I come into the Triton and I come into oscillators, there's a synth wave section, which are just samples of classic analog synths, oscillators from classic synths of the 80s and 90s. So same thing here. The only difference is I have my high pass filter a little higher up here, just kind of changing the tonal quality. And then obviously the oscillator being different. Now, the meat and potatoes here, essentially, in these Romplers, is we can start to break free of that traditional analog synth sound and start to use some of these samples that are in the Triton. And so this example here, I'm using a trombone soft sample, whatever that is. And so this is what it sounds like. Right, and I think what's really cool is to look at this from just the raw sound, playing a single note. Turn on the chord. Turn on the delay. Turn on the filter. Now, in this one, we're using a sawtooth wave here, and the difference here is I'm modulating the filter. So you can really change the feel of the song and the stabs as the song progresses by modulating the filter cutoff. So right here, I'm using a bandpass filter, and you'll see, if I go into the automation here, we're modulating that bandpass filter around. So we can kind of create this like rhythmic type feel with the stabs as the song is progressing. So we get something like this. Let's look at another example here. And I'm showing all these examples just to really drive this home in that these are actually very simple to do, but there's a lot of really cool things you can do in different sounds you can get just by slightly tweaking the filter, using a different filter type. Or if I come into the Triton here, I'm now going to enable two oscillators. So I have this DWGS guitar sample layered up with a classic analog sawtooth waveform. Right? And then down here, I'm using a high pass filter. And so it sounds like this. Very Terry Lee Brown Jr. sound there. let's look at another example here, and this time I'm going to use a organ sample here. And organs make for really great sounding chord stabs. They have this like sine wave quality to them where you just get these nice like woozy stabs with it. So same thing in the Triton, we just changed to a organ multi-sample plucky envelope, and then no filter on this, and this is what we get. Man, organ sounds are just amazing for stabs. And then we can kind of take that same thing and apply a filter to it. And so we get this. And what we're doing different on here is we're using a plucky ADSR envelope to modulate the filter cutoff. So we can see that modulation being applied to kind of snap that filter. And if you listen very closely, like you can hear it. There's almost this like rubber band bouncy sound on this compared to the other one. That's the original with the filter. Beautiful. I'm going to keep showing examples here. So here's another preset in the Triton, the Club Electric Piano. So this is an electric piano sample stacked up with another electric piano sample here. This one just like really nice tonal quality to it. And I'm actually using a notch filter on this, but it sounds like this. So these multi-samples here, like you get that really nice clank sound from this electric piano, stage hard here they call it. And this is just completely different stab sound just by changing the multi-samples in there. So to kind of recap what we looked at, we can take that basic framework of a traditional analog dub techno stab and begin to layer sample-based sounds with them, tweak the filter, and create some really cool stuff. So I want to show just another example here of an oddity. And so in this one, instead of using traditional sample-based sounds like pianos, organs, I'm just using random sound effects in the Triton. So we have this gunshot sample and this tambourine sample, and this is what we get. A little more industrial, very techno influenced, but you can actually create some like really cool rhythms by playing like a chord stab pattern and then using some very strange samples layered up within there. So just really want to speak to like, get creative with this. Again, you don't have to just use analog waveforms and electric piano samples. Use weird things in there and you can get some really cool results. So I want to show another like really quick way that you can come up with sounds super fast. So one is get your little dub techno pattern in as MIDI, right? And get that chugging along and just solo that. Get your chord set up in there and then just start letting it run. And come into your synth and just start changing the presets. Right, so I can tonally, this could be interesting. So let's take this preset. Let's create a plucky envelope here. So get rid of sustain, get rid of release, instant attack. Let's do it for both oscillators. Let's add our filter or delay. And then we can just flip through different presets and repeat this. Not the best examples there, but that's how you can very quickly just start to create really cool, unusual chord stabs by playing around in your synthesizer. In closing here, like most things, experiment. Get in there, take that basic framework I showed, make it your own, maybe sample the sound that you create, throw it in a sampler, play it back at different pitches. So many different routes you can take this to get some really great sounding tech house stabs. Hope y'all found this video useful. Let me know down in the comments below what you want to see on a video on next. Until next time, adios.